This is Stanford Engineering's The Future of Everything, and I'm your host, Russ Altman. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider rating and reviewing it. That's a great way for us to get feedback and also to spread the word about the podcast. Today, Michael Rao will tell us that theater performances are increasingly using digital media and even AI to expand the creative space of theater and make new things possible. It's the future of live performance. Before we get started, a reminder to rate and review the show. We like to get a 5.0, but only if we deserve it. I think all of us have been to the theater to see a live performance. It's really talented people doing what they do best, singing, performing opera, doing a dramatic presentation of a play that maybe you know by heart, or maybe it's the first time you've seen it. But you know what? Digital media is starting to change that. There are new creative possibilities, and people are trying to figure out how do we sensitively, creatively, and artistically integrate digital media and AI into theater. Well, Michael Rao is a professor of theater and performance studies at Stanford University. He's a director. He's directed plays, operas, other performances, and he's also interested in digital media and AI and how they may transform performance. He has really interesting thoughts about the relationship of gaming to theater, the relationship of individual human audience members to the performance that they're watching or experiencing, and many others. Michael, you have focused on digital media in theater and in performance, among other things. What's the opportunity there? Why are we talking about that?
Well, I think the opportunity is, to make new kinds of art, to kind of take this art form that's been around for centuries and re-examine it or put it into a slightly different medium or make some slight alterations and say, like, okay, what types of experiences and stories can come out of that? That's option one. And then option two is that in the theater, there's always this idea that the theater should reflect life, right? The life that we live. And increasingly, more and more, our lives are mediated by technology. And so one of the things for me, that I had like a weird crisis in roughly like 2011, where the plays that I was making on stage weren't reflecting the life that I was living. Like, it's pretty rare when you watch a play to see someone text someone else or, do a Skype call, especially back then in 2011. But for me, I was having these like really important experiences with and relationships through digital technology, whether it was like, talking to my parents or romantic partners. I was like, oh, this doesn't show up on stage. And so it prompted this weird shift for me as a director and theater maker. I was like, I think I need to figure out ways to incorporate more technology into the kinds of performances that I'm making, because that's actually reflective of my life and the life of most people in the audience. And it's kind of weird to say, oh yeah, we're going to pretend for an hour and a half that that no one has a cell phone right now.
Right. Right. Okay, so that's great, and my head is now officially exploding with follow-up questions. But let me just ask. I think we need to establish a denominator here about the kinds of things you're looking at with respect to things like AI, virtual reality, because then we can have a conversation about how your colleagues think about it, how the audiences like it, what it means for the existential human questions. But so give me a sense of the kinds of technologies that you're experimenting with. You and others I know are working with. Like I learned a little bit about Hamlet.ai, which looked really interesting. And tell me about it.
So I there's a bunch of different areas of exploration. And, I think it's important to give like full context to the kind of work that I do. There are times where I will just do a Shakespeare play, like a normal Shakespeare play, and that's totally fine, and I'll work in opera. And then there are other times that I will, say, well, what are the sets of technologies that exist in the world, and how can I bring those into a performance? And so those have ranged from, like, as you mentioned, like currently I'm kind of exploring what are these different machine learning algorithms and what are the ways in which I can incorporate them into the theater. Earlier than that, it was kind of how do you do spatial storytelling? How could you use like kind of augmented reality or even like Bluetooth beacons to kind of tell a story through a space using phones. And then earlier than that, I was like, I got obsessed with email. I was just like, you know what? This is a thing that people spend hours doing and is really a technology that has infected every bit of our lives. And can I tell a story through email? Can I make a theatrical performance that explores that particular medium? And so it's a kind of a real range of technologies, but the guiding principle is like, what are people using and how is it affecting their lives, and how can I then reflect that back to people in a theatrical performance?
Okay, so thank you. So that really does set a very nice baseline of the kinds of things. And I'm really glad you pointed out that you are a fully credentialed normal director. Forgive my use of that language, where humans are in front of you and you're telling them where to go and what to say and how to do it. And so okay, so the first set of questions are, how do you sit within your colleagues with respect to is this a mainstream within theater and performance now, or as a professor are you pushing a boundary that may or may not yield a big change in how the regular practitioners do their craft?
I think the way that I like to talk about it is because it can be really big and kind of complicated to talk about theater in all of its forms and to kind of locate it more specifically. And so I kind of use this analogy to food. So when we say theater, let's say food.
Okay,
and within
great.
food, you can have certain regional dishes like American food, German food. And, there are times where I make American fare when I'm here at Stanford. And then there's times where I'll get invited to Germany and I'll make something that's more culturally flavored. Within food, you can also be like, I just want a simple recipe that is time tested and true. And, people have been making it since the 1800s, like
Got
chili,
Yep.
Or sometimes I want to go to a high-end, very fancy modernist cuisine where there's a tiny little thing and a foam and like all
It's
that.
Like the bear,
Exactly.
the bear.
Yeah, And so when we talk about theater, it's like that. Like There are some times, and particularly I would say like this work is much more of like, here's this very narrow niche where some people are really excited and interested in it. And sometimes I like to make shows in that way. And then other times I will say, you know what, like the show that I'm doing right now at Stanford, this is just going to be a very, not traditional, but like a recipe that people already know, can appreciate. There's nothing like avant-garde or funky about it. And oftentimes, I think people, when they talk about art, they want to be like really fundamentalist about it. We're like, oh, we only have to push things forward, or like, no, we have to keep things in the past. And actually, as human beings, as a society, we're quite good at letting these two things exist simultaneously, at least in like the restaurant world. In art, for some reason, we don't.
That is super helpful, and I'm very aware that I'm not versed in the theory of theater and live performance, so some of these questions might be extremely basic, but I was struck when you said about electronic media is so pervasive in our life, and yet you go to the theater and nobody's texting, nobody's using email. Maybe we should address that. But then my initial, as you were saying that, I was thinking, well, we also go for walks in the forest, and in general, there's not a huge clamoring. Although we all do know that the first thing we'll do is check to see if we have reception. If we're lucky, there won't be reception, and we'll actually have a fully walk in the forest. And what you just said kind of answered that, my concern about that, because what I was thinking was, well, wait a minute, I'm not sure I need to have electronics and virtual reality in the theater because I have it everywhere else in my life, and maybe this is more like a walk in the forest. But then you said, Russ, you can walk in the forest, but you can also walk in VR, and it's all allowed and is perfectly reasonable. So I withdraw that question that I never asked. And I want to go to something that might be, I don't know if it's weird, but a lot of what you're talking about reminds me of gaming. And I think about gaming because I don't do it at all. And my partially because of my age, it just wasn't a thing. I did play, some games, but I have seen the growth of the gaming industry. And
Mm-hmm.
at first, I was extremely judgmental and extremely like, what are they doing? But then I talked to some thoughtful gamers who told me these are about stories that are reconfigurable. You care about the characters, you kind of become and then interact with characters. And it's this whole thing that made me say, oh my goodness, maybe this is the next big form of like, well, it's trite to say the next big form of entertainment because it's humongous business. But it took me a while. But then I began to understand why really good storytellers might go into game creation, why really good directors might start directing games. So tell me about, is there a relationship in your mind between theater live performance and the gaming industry? And how should I think about all of that?
Well, I definitely have an opinion about it that I don't know how the gaming folks will feel about it. But my kind of like attitude on it is that and it totally comes from my own biases, but I always see the world of gaming as coming out of the world of theater. That like,
Boom, there you go.
I'm taking over gaming. I'm saying actually you're part of theater. That uh, that for me, theater in its like basic form, where is a game, right? I'm going to pretend to be somebody else for the next 20 minutes or hour and a half, or I'm going to pretend to be a guy called Romeo, and then these things are happening. And it's a game that only works if the audience chooses to pretend that I'm somebody else, right? And so I actually, and we call a play, that like it's all built into that kind of same, if I want to use a fancy word, like ludic uh, component to these systems of entertainment. And
Yes.
I think it's really just about like how much towards a sort of like mechanic approach, where like so I certainly did grow up playing video games. Like, Super Mario Brothers is about like jumping and hopping on these other things. And it's less about the story. There's like a very simple story about a plumber, but mostly it's about the mechanics of the thing.
Right.
Versus you can lean in towards the other side, which gets more theatrical, or many of these games that are much more like what people call cinematic and I would call theater, is really about telling these elaborate, beautiful stories that are
Yes.
really complicated. I think it's all actually the same thing because, and here's my argument for why it's theater. It requires the same suspension of disbelief by the audience member to say, instead of this guy standing in front of you and pretending to be Romeo, I'm going to say that these pixels in front of me, as they move, are a character that has emotions and feels, and I'm going to ascribe all of those things to these moving sets of pixels on a screen. I actually don't think that there's that much of a difference, but so like at its core, the experience of the audience is kind of the same.
Yes, thank you. That actually, I love that answer, and I don't know what the gamers think, but I'm done. I'm done. Gaming is a branch of theater. Let's move on. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is one of the reasons when I go to a theater and really any performance and really anything, I'm looking for people who are at the pinnacle of capability in whatever they're doing, and typically it makes me cry. And I'm not even kidding. Like an operatic singer who's just killing it, or a performance. And I wanted to ask about that part of the theater, at least for me. And part of your answer, of course, could be, Russ, I already told you that we can have normal. I don't even want to use traditional. We can have traditional theater, of course. But what is the role of the human in theater? And especially when I think about like what you just said, that there might be pixels that are making me cry. Is that going to happen? How should I think about the connection to a human who I think this is talent plus hard work, all putting on display for me, and it's going to make me cry right now. So, and I know you deal with real actors and you direct them. Is there going to be changes in how we relate to the objects of our entertainment, or am I going to still see? Or is it just going to change the way absolute excellent pinnacle human performance gets portrayed?
I don't think so. I don't think that it fundamentally changes things. I can. Okay, so
Sorry, I asked a long,
it is.
rambling question.
Well,
So
and it's also a very complicated one, and there are many people in the theater industry who get very upset by the answer that I like to give. But
good.
it's my true response. So, what you're talking about is this question of liveness. How is liveness important to the theatrical event? And there are some people who are like, absolutely, like it's not theater if there isn't a person on stage doing that thing. It doesn't count if they're not breathing with the audience.
And also a little bit at risk, right? A little bit like something could go wrong, but the professionals and the killers, it never seems to go wrong. They just kill it.
Sure. I take a different approach, and I would say that there are, because again, like I have this idea about like computer games are a portion of theater, and you can get moved by a computer game in the same way that you can, if you've ever seen a really amazing puppet show, there's no live actor on stage. You're watching a piece of wood get jiggled around at certain times, and at the same time, if you've seen incredible puppetry, it is deeply moving.
Yes.
And I as I was telling you, like I had this crisis back in 2011. I decided I'm going to make a piece that's that pushes this question to like the forefront. And so I did the craziest, weirdest thing possible. I built a show where there are no actors and it's just an office cubicle. And you walk into the office cubicle, and this is when I was obsessed with email. And you just get an email from that's addressed to you that says, "Hi, Russ. Sorry, I'm at an offsite today. I just need you to do this Excel work." And the entire performance is you sitting at a computer terminal, answering emails and doing calculations in Microsoft Excel. And I'm not joking when I say this is the most successful show that I have ever produced.
Wow.
It has been running. It won some of the top awards in the Edinburgh Festival.
What's the name of the show?
It's called Temping. So
Temping, yes.
You know what like temping is, where you come in and do
I did it in college, yes.
Yeah, it's exactly that experience, but I set out the challenge for myself to, can I create a satisfying theatrical story just using these tools? So you never see anyone else. You're just alone in an office cubicle. But what you kind of, through reading things and doing these sets of actions, you are taken on this really intense journey that asks you to ask really big questions about your life and the meaning of life. So I was still kind of able to kind of mush those things in there. And that was a sort of deliberate provocation to say, I don't think that a live actor is necessary to have a satisfying theatrical experience. And people will quibble with me. They'll be like, well, the audience is alive, or like, and I'll be, well, that's part of it.
But now you're at the boundary, and it's very different from the question that I asked.
Yeah.
This is The Future of Everything, and we'll have more with Michael Rao next. Welcome back to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman, and I'm speaking with Michael Rao from Stanford University. In the last segment, Michael told us how theater should be broadly construed. Performances can involve humans. They can also involve augmentation with digital media and AI. In fact, he started to tell us about the show called Temping, which he created, that's very successful and very unusual. I'll ask him more about that in this segment. At the end, Michael, you told me about one of your most successful performance or presentations, which was Temping, and it was a single person in a cubicle. How did that work? So you said there was some Excel, some email. Was this a highly branched logic where you said if they do this, then do this other thing, but if they do this, or was it kind of linear and you tried to keep everybody on a similar path?
Thank you. I love this question. It was both. And what we were trying to do is to like think a little bit about how to tell a story right with no actors, but also how to make it theatrically satisfying. So what we did is we based it off a real job that people do every single day, called being an actuary. And an actuary, what they do is they calculate how long people will live for life insurance payments, right? And like statistically, based off all of this, you can actually, it's not that hard of a calculation to make. And we have all of these tables, and you can get really precise data on like, how long, based off of a couple different factors, how long someone is going to be living. And I got fascinated with this idea. And so what we did is we put that into the show. So you would sit down at the cubicle, you'd get a couple emails from your boss, and they would say, all right, we just need you to do this calculation. And you'd kind of open up this Excel file. It's a bunch of people kind of anonymized with like a certain couple little factors like the age, the gender, whether or not they're married or divorced, because that apparently changes your life expectancy. And we would teach the audience how to do this calculation. It's really simple. And each time you would update, oh, this person has 20 more years left to live, 30 more years left to live. The lights in the cubicle would change. This music would start playing, and your printer would turn on, and it would print out a picture of that person's face and a moment from their life that was really personal, like a father watching.
So they're not doing their own actuarial calculation. Oh,
we get there.
Sorry.
So you're doing your like normal, boring office work. You're getting a couple emails from your coworkers that are like making some jokes or kind of squabbling with each other. Like I also wanted to capture that feeling of being CC'd on an email you weren't supposed to receive. Because that's something incredibly human that, I couldn't figure out a way to represent that on stage. But I knew as someone sitting down at a cubicle, that feeling of like, whoa, this wasn't addressed to me, but I'm going to scroll down and read all of this.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So I wanted to tell a story that way. And so this life expectancy calculation keeps coming up, and you keep doing it for people and kind of having this realization of, oh, that person only has X number of years left to live. And you asked about branching. There's a script that based off of how well you do this job, you get different stories. If your boss appreciates you or doesn't appreciate you. And then we have a kind of propose, there's a little moment where you're presented with a chance to like, do you want to calculate your own life expectancy? And people, when they hit that part of the show, they freeze. Some people don't want to do it. Some people do it. Some people spend 10 minutes there going through themselves, their whole family, all of their friends, calculating that stuff. And then the piece ends, so that it always has the same ending. I'm kind of ruining the show now, where the desk that you've been sitting at, you find out that you're just replacing someone who's been laid off. And depending on how well you've done your job, you get offered the chance. Do you want to keep doing this job? Do you want to stay? Or do you want to kind of move on into the next thing? And so it takes a huge emotional journey for an audience member, right? It's a very personal, really powerful thing to both think about your own mortality, to think about other people's mortality. But at the same time, it is, when you describe it, it's deeply boring. I say to people, yeah, you just sit in an office cubicle and you do Excel calculations for an hour.
It's amazing. So just for painting the picture, there's nobody watching this. Like you or somebody in the back could be watching the terminal and everything to make sure everything's working. But there is no other audience.
No.
And I also am very interested that you refer to the person in the cubicle as the audience, because you could easily have referred to them as the star of the show or the actor, right?
Sure, totally.
So fascinating. Okay, so many lessons to be taken, and it does sound moving. And just when you describe the printing out or telling the good news or the bad news about somebody who they may have just formed a little tendril of a connection with, and then you're kind of saying, well, let me tell you the end of the story before you get okay. So that sounds fabulous. And that was, you said, quite a while ago.
I mean, I made that show. I had my crisis in 2011. I made that show in 2014, and it has been running since.
Okay.
The next time we're going to do it will be in June in Munich.
And so 10 plus years. And so that leads me into my next topic, which is kind of obvious. 10 years ago, we did not have the kind of AI that we have now. And I'm going to guess that these new large language models and other aspects of deep learning and AI have also caught your attention. And what are you making of them? What are you making of them? And how are you processing the opportunities that AI might be giving you in your work?
So, thank you. I love this question. I've been kind of I'm still trying to figure it out. I think is the most honest answer. And it seems like every day stuff changes. And so things that I couldn't do 2 months ago, I'll wake up and read a paper and be like,
Right.
oh, well, I guess I know what I'm doing today is figuring out if I can do this new
I've been telling colleagues that most conclusions about AI have an expiration date of 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And so you're allowed to have your opinion and you're allowed to say it stinks at X, but you can only say it stinks at X for about 3 to 6 months. And then you better check to make sure it still stinks at X.
Yeah. Well, so the thing that I'm trying to do, because it's changing so much, is to think about, okay, what are the ways in which I can use this in a theatrical performance that doesn't replace the interesting work that a human can already do? Or what are the ways that it can augment the work that a human can already do, as opposed to just do the whole thing? And that's been amazing because what I quickly learned as I spent a lot of time experimenting is like just putting like large language model outputs or using image generation with like not much of a prompt is actually pretty boring, and it doesn't make for particularly interesting art. And so what I've tried to do is I kind of built a like close to real-time image generator that takes video or images from a live performance that people are doing on stage in front of you, runs it through an image generator, and then alters that slightly. So you'll be able to still see the actor on stage, and then up above the stage, a projection of the kind of like AI dream version of it. And so they're still keeping the actors on stage. You're still letting them do the story, but then you're kind of adding this other layer to it that feels like a secondary story, or that because the image generation is so interesting and so good, it can kind of pull new or reframe things that you can kind of already see on stage and see it in a totally new light. So
do you inject, as you're doing that image generation, do you inject a perspective or a bias based on what's going on? Like now make them ugly. Like they're all beautiful people, but they've just said a bunch of very ugly things. So like make them ugly in the or something like that.
You can do stuff like that. You can because I've been very careful about like avoiding kind of intellectual property. Like I'll turn them all into Greek statues. Make this scene look like a cityscape at night, and
exactly.
And so it's a way of kind of like using AI to really quickly reframe the thing that's happening on stage. So that's like one thing that I've been doing.
I can imagine that being powerful. I can imagine just based on your description, I can imagine that affecting as an audience member, my interpretation and understanding of what's happening with the humans by seeing this kind of projection of what's happening in this fantasy but related to reality space.
Exactly. The other thing I've been exploring with has been kind of using LLM texts as kind of moments where we could like add a little bit of additional script, or script that's based off of something that's happening today, right now in the room, to kind of quickly rewrite things. So like in a traditional theatrical performance, the actors spend a month memorizing the lines that are written by the playwright, and they're very precise about that.
I'll add lovingly written by the playwright.
Exactly. And I was like, well, that is a beautiful, wonderful, I love making theater that way. But what I did is built another system that uses kind of in-ear monitors. So like very like what you're wearing, Russ. So there are these very small things where you can ask for an audience suggestion of a particular topic or something, and it will really quickly create a script. And then I wrote a little bit of code that cuts up each individual line and then uses text to speech to kind of turn that into a piece of audio. And then we send each individual line to the actors.
Wow.
That allows them to still be looking at each other, not to hold like a script in the hands or to be reading off like cue cards, but just to listen in ear and say the thing that they're hearing.
So is it fair to call that some kind of augmented improv?
Yeah, I think that's a really great term for it.
And how does it go? I mean, okay, now we're going back to my question about like humans doing things that they're really good at. I'm just going to speculate that there are people who are going to be really good at accepting that and
Yeah.
just smoothly integrating it into their character in a way that makes you say, "Holy cow! I can't believe this person is doing that." And then there are others who become useless, confused, disoriented, and just not very entertaining. Is
Yeah.
that what you're seeing? Or is this now creating new pressures on human actors to acquire skills that they've never been asked to do before?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's actually like a pretty old technique in the theater, but it was just more of like if there was a certain actor who really couldn't memorize their lines, you would give them an in-ear monitor, and then someone backstage would be
Oh my
whispering
goodness.
the lines to them. So that part is like that.
We've seen this
Element is
before. We've
cool.
seen this before.
It's
Yeah.
just more of like I wanted to say, well, what if we use an LLM to kind of put some of that stuff in, and like that's the other thing that I think is really complicated and interesting that I'm still struggling with incorporating AI into a theater, is that when I do Shakespeare or when I do, like a play that's been written 100 years ago, the story is the same night after night and everyone is prepared for that. If I start to add these kind of like both LLM text or these like image generation videos, those things change and they change constantly and
Yes.
they aren't consistent at all. And I think that's kind of beautiful if they're not consistent. But then there's that question of like, well, if it's not consistent, will it still be good night after night?
Right. Right. The New York Times reviewer may have gotten a good or a bad night.
Exactly. And so it kind of questions or it shakes up what is usually like the very strong foundation of what we say is good theater, and instead it adds this like maybe like other live aspect to it, or it makes everything feel shaky, which can be really exciting. Like
Right.
you'll watch these actors do this and everyone is like, oh my goodness, what's about to happen? And at the same time, sometimes it's really great and sometimes it's not.
But my brain is flashing the word jazz in all caps,
Yeah,
in all caps,
exactly.
and I think that you have some precedents where, hey, this can be spectacularly magical and every now and then, but as we get better at it and as we learn the rules, we can try to make sure that more often than not it's just beautiful jazz music and not cacophony.
Exactly. And that's the thing that like with some of these productions that I'm working on right now, it's actually about like how do you train that set of skills and how do you learn how to accept these things and really kind of view these AI components as a co-creator or an assistant
Yes.
where you're working with it as opposed to I want this thing to do all of the work for me, which just never ends up being all that interesting.
So we could go on forever, but we're going to run out of time. So my last question is the issue of disclosure to the audience. So for this example, for what you're talking about with the augmented improv, do you tell the audience? Because I can imagine a big, long discussion and thought process about whether or not this needs to be told ahead of time, never, or at the end.
Yeah. For me, like, I think it is better to say that up front because then people actually have an appreciation for it. And the way that we're working with it right now is we ask for the audience's input. So we bring them into it, and that kind of, I mean, it's a little bit of like, it makes them be like, oh yeah, they really are doing that, as opposed to,
Right.
oh, this is just
And you also kind of brilliantly get them to be allies with the whole experience.
yeah, they have that experience. I mean, and I think that's one of the things we did with Temping and some of the other interactive components that I think is really beautiful and can be really exciting for an audience member is when they see themselves in the performance, where something that they said or something that they felt or something that they did shows up back that allows them to be reflected back in them. Because for me, what actually matters, what deep down is important to me about making theater is like the audience's presence is crucial. Less about the actor's presence, but the fact that you showed up to come see this art today, that's the thing that I'm really interested in. So if you see yourself on stage, if you see some element of something that you did, that's the heart of the theater for me.
Thanks to Michael Rao. That was the future of live performance. Thank you for tuning into this episode. Don't forget, we have more than 250 back episodes, so you can explore the future of everything for a long time. Please remember to hit follow in whatever app you're listening to. That'll guarantee that you get alerted to all of the new shows and you never miss the future of anything. You can connect with me on many social media, usually at RB Altman or at Russ B. Altman on Blue Sky, Mastodon, and Threads. You can follow, and of course, LinkedIn. And you can also follow Stanford Engineering on at Stanford Engineering or at Stanford ENG.